What's up, everybody? Happy mandatory minicamp day. Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. As you know, we are about to kick off 3 straight days of mandatory minicamp. Tuesday and Wednesday will be open both to fans and the media. Thursday will be open only to the media. I do plan on being there on Tuesday and Wednesday. I don't think I'm going to make it on Thursday, but either way, should be really fun to hear all the news, notes, and reports coming out of minicamp, and I will have breakdowns from the next 2 days of mandatory minicamps for you right here on the Pack a Day podcast. So make sure you are subscribed if you have not already. And let me start off today's show by telling you a little secret. Please don't tell anyone else. I hesitate to share this, but mandatory minicamp, or just the minicamps, are awesome to go to. They are one of the absolute most underrated things that you can go to as a Packer fan all year long. Everyone knows about training camp, but I would say that training camp has actually become a little bit almost too much. It's been a little bit commercialized. You have the bikes, which have now become commercialized, and everything is just like everyone's packed in and you have to get there early to get a seat. And it's fun, don't get me wrong, but it's also in like the height of summer and it's really hot. Minicamp is your first look as a fan at a lot of the new free agent pickups, at the rookies. This is your first chance as a fan to go get it, to see them. And I know it's not in pads, but usually the weather is very reasonable. It's supposed to be very reasonable on Tuesday. Looks like it might rain on Wednesday. We'll see. So keep an eye on that. Usually the stands aren't super packed, and it's usually a very fun, easygoing atmosphere, and it really gives you your first opportunity to see this team. And it's the first time that the players are practicing in front of fans for this season as well. So keep it under wraps, keep it secret, but I can't tell you enough. Mini camps as a fan, if I were just going as a fan, I'll be on the media side the next 2 days, but just as a fan, mini camps are actually some of my absolute favorite things to go to all year long, because everything else, everything else with the NFL, right, is just like exploded to the nth degree, and everything's busy and crowded. And, games are, not to say that training camp or games or anything aren't amazing, but like family night is crazy. The shareholders meeting is crazy. The preseason games are crazy. The regular season's crazy. Training camp's crazy. Like everything's super busy, and mandatory minicamp is like the only thing left that there's a good amount of people there, but it's still a little bit under the radar, and it's way underappreciated in my opinion. So if you had not had a chance to check out Packers minicamp, highly recommend you doing it. It is vastly underrated, and like I said, one of my favorite things to go to every single year. All right, let's get into what I'm going to be watching and your Packers minicamp preview for this week. The first thing is Aaron Rodgers is back in Green Bay. It's been reported on Monday that he is in fact in Green Bay. He had mentioned that he had planned to participate in the mandatory minicamp. Him being at mandatory minicamp and practicing is really a non-story. But had he not been there, it would have been a massive story, right? Like it would have gotten blown probably completely out of proportion, but it would have been everywhere. Rodgers is not participating in mandatory minicamp. Is he bought into this team? He just got a huge contract. Does he care? It would have been massive, right? So while him being there isn't massive and it's not a story, it's at least a story in the fact that we don't have to cover what would have been a big story ad nauseum in here, all from the national media, all about Rodgers not caring about the team and not being at minicamp, etc. So seems like he is in Green Bay. He will be at practice. I would assume, unless he has some sort of nagging minor injury, that he will be practicing with the team. So this will be our first look potentially at Aaron Rodgers in 2022. Again, we don't know if he has any sort of nagging injury that would hold him out or anything, but assuming his physical goes well on Monday or went well on Monday, we should see him in practice Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday this week. In addition, and I think the follow-up to that is that this is going to be our first chance to get to see some of these new wide receivers and rookie wide receivers with Aaron Rodgers. I'll start with the rookies here: Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, to a lesser extent, Samori Toure, but we saw Doubs and Watson get significant playing time with the ones during practices. If that continues, we should see a good portion of Watson and Doubs practicing for the first time with Aaron Rodgers. And that is always a maybe not like a sink or swim moment, but you start building that rapport, and Rodgers is watching everything and starting to gain trust. So we will see how those rookies respond to Aaron being there and out practicing, how he handles sort of the interactions with these younger wide receivers. It's just going to be something that is worth watching, and something that and I'm sure a lot of the other media members will be keeping a very close eye on. The next one at wide receiver is Allen Lazard, right? And my expectation is that Allen Lazard, unless we hear something different, is probably not going to be there. The first thing is that unless he signs his restricted free agent tender, he can't be there. He's not under contract, and he can't practice if he's not under contract. So while this is a mandatory minicamp, it is a mandatory minicamp for players that are under contract, and Allen Lazard is not one of those players, which means he will not be practicing unless something happens between me recording this and practice on Tuesday. So we'll see. That means he's likely not there. There was an interview that he did with an Iowa newspaper that basically said he'll be there in July. So it sounds like this is something that he doesn't plan on being at minicamp. Will probably sign his tender eventually. But my guess is, and if I'm Allen Lazard's agent, I'm talking to the Packers and saying, listen, this guy is supposed to be your potential number one wide receiver this year, and you are on a 1-year, $3.9 million deal. We want a bit more job security, and we want a bit more money for Allen Lazard. We would like a long-term deal. And my guess is Green Bay is going to say, no, and you actually don't have much leverage, and if you want to play this season, you have to play for us under your 1-year restricted free agent tender. There's not much else, and eventually he will sign that tender and show up to training camp would be my guess. But him not being potentially at minicamp, at least as, again, I'm recording this, is at least a little bit of a story. I don't think it's like something that we need to break down and like have it be a full episode or like go into too much detail in, because I do expect Allen Lazard to be, in training camp and part of this team at some point this summer. But if he's not there, it is still notable and it is still worth mentioning. So we'll definitely be keeping an eye on if all of a sudden Allen Lazard signs and is there, or if this starts becoming a little bit more of a story. I think Aaron Nagler put it best, is that there's nothing to worry about until there's something to worry about, something to that extent. Right now, I'm not worried, but the further this goes along, it gets a little bit more of a story, If he's not at training camp, then it becomes a big story. But as of right now, still nothing much, but I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on it, and if anything happens with it over the next few days. Sticking with wide receiver, we should get our first glimpse of Sammy Watkins in the green and gold as well. It sounded like he has been at Lambeau from time to time, but was not at any of the OTA sessions open to the media. So this will be potentially our first glimpse of Sammy Watkins. I'm assuming he will be there since this is a mandatory minicamp. But we'll get to see, ideally, Rodgers to Sammy Watkins. And again, with likely no Allen Lazard there, this gives some of these other receivers, Sammy Watkins and Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson, Amari Rodgers, an opportunity to build that rapport with Aaron Rodgers. So that will be another thing that I'm keeping an eye on, is, again, our very first glimpse of Sammy Watkins in green and gold. Next up is David Bakhtiari, and I fully do not expect David Bakhtiari to be practicing, but it would be a major story if he was practicing. So is he on the side? Is he doing the rehab work? Is he not practicing at all? Is he actually practicing? That will be another story, and something else that I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on is just the status of Bach. And like I said, I don't expect him back till training camp at the earliest, but once again, it would be a very huge story if all of a sudden he is back practicing at mandatory minicamp this week. Speaking of the offensive line, I just want to see how they continue to shuffle this offensive line with Bakhtiari and with Jenkins out. So far, it has been Yash entirely at left tackle. It has been John Runyon Jr. at left guard. It has been Myers at center. It has been Royce Newman and Jake Hansen at right guard, and then Royce Newman as well as Cole Van Lanen at right tackle. Do they start shuffling this up anymore? Do any of those players not get the reps with the ones? Does Cole Van Lanen move to the twos? Does Jake Hansen move strictly to the twos? And do they stick with one line? Do any of the rookies, Zach Tom or Sean Ryan, Rasheed Walker, do any of them get playing time with the ones? Is there any other shakeup there? So I want to continue to see how they rotate this offensive line. Do we see Yash get any time at right tackle? These are all things that I think are worth keeping an eye on. Very much expect John Runyon Jr. at left guard. Very much expect Josh Myers at center. But I think that left tackle, right guard, and right tackle, I think those are still worth keeping an eye on. Yash probably has left tackle if it's not Bakhtiari. But still, I want to see if there's any more shuffling along the offensive line. Inside linebacker, OTAs, it was Chris Barnes at inside linebacker. And I want to see if they start to work Quay Walker in a little bit more. either way want to get more of an eye on Quay Walker because he is their first pick in this last year's draft. There's a lot of expectations that goes along with that. And I want to start seeing if he at least gets maybe not like the starting snaps over Chris Barnes, but do they start rotating him in a little bit with the ones? In OTAs, he was with the twos, and it was just Barnes and Campbell with the ones. So I want to see if they start putting a little bit more responsibility on Quay Walker's plate, maybe start working him with the ones in some capacity. I don't know that Quay Walker needs to be like the starter from day one, but I think you're hoping at some point, if you're the Packers, that he's able to supplant and overcome Chris Barnes at some point this season and be that number 2 inside linebacker next to Devondre Campbell. So we will see if he starts getting integrated with the ones a little bit more as time goes along. Does that happen this week in minicamp? Does that wait until training camp? When does that start happening? That will be another inside linebacker battle that I will be keeping an eye on at minicamp this week. In addition, Jair Alexander should be back, which could give us our first indication of how Green Bay plans on potentially lining up these corners. Is it Jair in the slot? Do we get Stokes or Rasul Douglas in the slot? Or with the base defense, is it going to be probably Jair and either Stokes or Douglas with Keyshawn Nixon in the slot? We still have a lot to go and a lot to decide and a lot to see as to how Green Bay is going to line up these defensive backs. That slot position is one of the really only remaining question marks, I think, on the starting 11. So that will be our first glimpse at who is actually in the slot. I expect it to be a lot of Jair Alexander, especially in obvious passing downs, but that will be worth keeping an eye on as well. Also going to be keeping an eye on special teams. Can Mason Crosby stay hot? He was 6 of 6 in the open media session last week in OTAs. Can he continue that? And can we see this special teams, especially Mason Crosby, gain a level of consistency with the 2 long snappers, with Pat O'Donnell holding, with hopefully better protection? Love to see Mason Crosby stay hot as we get into the latter part of summer and training camp, and then, of course, into the season as well. And now that a lot of these starters are back, and Adrian Amos and Devondre Campbell, amongst others, do we start seeing more starters on special teams as well? So a lot of times before, like, special teams practice would start, and I think a lot of us fans and media and everyone would be like, all right, special teams is practicing. But with Bisaccia there and starters practicing on special teams, it just feels like it's carrying a little bit more weight, and it's just worth keeping an eye on a little bit more. So I will definitely be watching that as well. Also going to be keeping an eye on if we see a bit more team periods and some higher intensity practice. The sessions that were open to the media were fairly nondescript, not a lot of team periods. Even those were relatively like kind of almost at like a walkthrough pace other than a couple 2-minute drills. So I'm seeing if we start to see some more team drills, some more 11 on 11, some more intensity, and practice start, taking a little bit more of a higher intensity than what we saw during the open sessions at OTAs. Some quick hitters. We'll, of course, be keeping an eye on Jordan Love and how he looks. Can Romeo Doubs follow up on a successful OTA from a week ago? And can Tyler Davis continue his ascent as tight end? Is anyone missing from practice outside of Alan Lazard? We mentioned it sounds like Aaron Rodgers is in town, but if anyone else is actually missing a mandatory minicamp, that definitely becomes a little bit of a story as well. So we'll be keeping an eye out for that. And I think last but not least is who starts standing out. Romeo Doubs was one of the headliners from last week in OTAs. Do any of the other players start standing out and start making some noise and start making a name for themselves? There's a limited amount of practices, right? When it comes to OTAs, mini camps, training camps, there's only so many opportunities that you get to start making a real name for yourself. Mandatory mini camps will be that opportunity. Aaron Rodgers is here. The starters will be here. I do think the intensity will pick up. Fans will be in the stands. Who takes the bull by the horns and starts standing out a little bit? And of course, I will be covering that, everything else we discussed, and anything else that happens over minicamp over the next 2 days. As I mentioned, I don't think I'm going to make Thursday's practice, but we'll of course still have all the news and notes for you as well. So once again, if you are not subscribed yet, please make sure to do so. I'll be right back here tomorrow breaking down day 1 of mandatory minicamp. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.